Okay, Dad, good morning. Today is Wednesday, September 25th, and let's start this morning off by talking about the Middle East. I'm curious about how other countries in the Middle East are reacting to this recent bombardment into Lebanon and also just the pager and walkie-talkie attacks themselves. Because I was listening to a few of the UN speeches. I just listened to King Abdullah of Jordan right here, and he gave a very passionate speech. And Jordan was a country that actually participated in shooting down Iranian missiles to protect Israel before. And now you can see that King Abdullah is saying that the UN is failing its job and we need to really protect the Palestinians and we need to support Palestine and we need to stop Israel. And also recently, Turkey's Erdogan, I have the exact quote here, said, just as Hitler was stopped by an alliance of humanity, Netanyahu and his murder network must be stopped by humanity. Pretty strong words.
Strong words, yeah.
So can you just take it from there? What are we seeing happening in the Middle East and these other countries?
I'm afraid that we're not seeing any change. These two leaders that you mentioned, King Abdullah and Erdogan, I think are a perfect example. They're representative of a kind of leadership that's all too familiar in the Middle East. And it is all talk, when it comes to the Palestinians, it's all talk and really no action. Just to give an example, I think we brought this up before. Erdogan, actually, there's a gas pipeline that runs through Turkey, and goes to Israel, and he could cut it off or threaten to cut it off. He hasn't. He did at one point promise that he was actually going to end all trade with Israel, but he didn't. He's done nothing substantive. He's given, fiery, impassioned speeches. This is just the latest example of that. But there has been no fundamental change in policy. Abdullah, maybe this is sort of he's ratcheting up the rhetoric. I don't remember him speaking in such an impassioned way before. But the truth is that he's in bed with the Israelis. He works with them. I'll just give you one example. While the Houthis have pretty much shut down all Israeli-linked trade through the Red Sea, a land route was established, and it passes through Jordan and Saudi Arabia. It's done with the cooperation of the UAE. And so he's helping to keep Israel afloat. He's working with Israel. And I don't, until, the words are words, but we have to see actions. And I don't think this really amounts to anything. He probably even told the Israelis, hey, I got to make the speech because my people are angry. And they are, most of of Jordan Jordan's population is made up of Palestinian refugees, and they're seething, and he knows it. So
I think
King
that's Abdullah's wife, I believe, is Palestinian.
Yeah, actually, I'm not sure about that, but she may very well be. So anyway, unfortunately, I just don't think it means anything. I'm going to be a cynic, but I think the cynics are usually right.
Okay, well, that's pretty disappointing. I listened to those and I felt encouraged that something was happening.
Yeah.
Well, why would Abdullah and Erdogan simply lend lip service? Why do they not take a...
It's easier to understand in the case of King Abdullah because Jordan is a very small and weak country relative to Israel. And I think he's quite simply... And he's also been supported by having this friendly relationship with Israel. He's received a lot of support, economic and otherwise, from the United States. And so, he's in a weaker position, and it's easier to understand. I don't think it justifies what he's doing, but it's easier to understand. In the case of Erdogan, Erdogan he's a snake. I mean, he just speaks out of both sides of his mouth. You just can't trust him. He's backstabbed everybody at some point, including the Russians. Everybody knows, what kind of person Erdogan is. And I think in the end, he's just really more interested in his own power. First of all, Turkey's influence, second of all. And when it comes to Palestine, he's not going to actually sacrifice those interests. I guess what he's looking at as well. If he actually does turn the screws on Israel, there could be economic consequences. Maybe his family will suffer financially. I'm not sure exactly what's there for him, but that's the way he looks at things.
If he's such a snake and has backstabbed everybody he's worked with, how does he stay? Why is he president? Is he popular in Turkey? Why does he keep?
Well,
on
he
getting...
wins. I mean, he's more popular than the opposition. I guess like he knows what to do domestically. He's an Islamist, and I guess maybe he delivers on some of the promises as he makes to the Islamic community in Turkey. Clearly, I think the Turkish people would like to see more support, and that's why he gives these impassioned speeches. But he's just not interested. He just is, for whatever reason, he isn't, because he's not doing anything.
I mean, comparing Netanyahu to Hitler is a pretty bold move. It's pretty.
I think he did it actually earlier. I think he did it several months ago. It's not the first time he's done that.
It was met with applause at the UN. So, I mean, if anything, at least that's indicative of just...
Well, that's true. I mean, words do mean something on one level. Even if the person who's saying the words has no intention of backing them up, it does help to, to support a general perception of Israel. That's true. And it does hurt Israel in that sense. We have to give them that much credit.
Okay, just that words hurt, but he's not a man of action. So you don't think that? Because this is where I was going to take it next. Was going to say, do you think Turkey will shut off the pipeline, the gas pipeline to Israel?
Yeah.
There
may be a time when he calculates that he's got to do it because, maybe the domestic pressures become such that he thinks that for his own survival it becomes necessary. It's possible. We can't say that he'll never. He has a history of always kind of playing both sides, off against each other. He always likes to stand in the middle, between NATO and Russia, between Europe and now he wants to be a member of BRICS. He's always, I guess that's partly what he's doing here. At some point, he just may calculate that the pressures are too great on one side. I got to give them something. Like I have to give my domestic base something. So this relationship with Israel has been economically beneficial, but I'm paying too great a cost, and he would do it. I don't think he has. You have to say that I don't think he has any ideological commitments to anyone but himself and the power of Turkey, within the region. I think that's as far as it goes. So he doesn't have an ideology. He's not a Zionist, by any stretch of the imagination. So he may just at some point say, Israel is a sinking ship. We got to get off of it. That could happen. That could happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be a very popular move within Turkey if he did that, even if they did suffer economically in the short term.
Maybe.
Could you, let's say, imagine if the IDF has moved into Lebanon and they're basically trying to do what they've done to Gaza and Lebanon, and then Erdogan cuts off the gas pipeline. How damaging would that be to Israel? Would that really cause them to have to stop that? Because basically my understanding is that Israel can't do what it's doing without the support of the United States militarily. But I'm wondering also, would it be the same thing that Israel can't do what it's doing because of Turkey? Because if Turkey just cut off that gas pipeline, would it be just as damaging as if the United States cut off its military aid?
Yeah, I don't know exactly what kind of infrastructure they have there. I'm sure it would be damaging, but I think they could continue the war. There would be the U.S. and the Western powers would do whatever they could to replace, that gas. I don't know if they have, if Israel has liquefied, LNG terminals or not, but I suspect that they do, and that's probably what LNG would be diverted to Israel, probably at the expense of Europe, because to do whatever they could do to help them. It would hurt, but I don't think it would stop, bring the war effort to a grinding halt.
Okay, all right. So I was wondering if perhaps if Turkey had a card to play that was as powerful as the United States in terms of turning something off.
Not as powerful as the United States, but I think that relationship that Israel has with Turkey and with Saudi Arabia and with the UAE and Jordan, those and Egypt. In fact, they really are. They cooperate with all these governments, even when and these governments, will talk one way, but they'll act in a different way, and everybody knows it now. Again, there just may be a limit to how far these governments can ignore popular sentiment,
Right.
and I think there's prior to October 7th, Saudi Arabia and I think the UAE were in negotiations with Israel, and actually there was a chance that they were going to normalize relations. This was the so-called Abraham Accords, but that was off the table. And now Saudi Arabia has made it clear that they can't. They know they can't do that. So
Right.
they've had to step back in their cooperation, to at least to some extent.
Right. So, I mean, it doesn't sound like that Israel will be able to normalize relations with really any of these countries. Right now, it's just going to
No,
degrade further and further. It's not coming back.
I don't think they
And
could do it. At
and
this point.
so right, and if they can't, then that's also a pretty serious nail in the coffin for Israel. If they don't have Egypt, Turkey, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, kind of turning the other way and giving them cover, they could be in real big trouble. Because I was listening to our favorite man, Lindsey Graham, last night, and he was talking about
You're a braver man than I am. I don't think, or you got a stronger stomach than I do. Maybe is what I
yeah,
should
but
say.
he was just saying how that the need for Israel to normalize relationships with Iran, I mean, sorry, not with Iran, with Saudi Arabia, and that it could be done easily, and that we have to turn our attention on the great Satan, is the word he used, Iran.
Yeah, the strange obsession with Iran. Yeah. Yeah.
But
Again, Iran is a country that hasn't invaded another country in something like 400 years, going back to historic Persia. It's not an aggressive country. It just isn't. Its great sin is to be part of the resistance, or, that's, you could say, the main actor in this axis of resistance. The aggressive expansionist power is Israel and has been Israel for many, many decades. And that is Iran's great sin, along with Syria's and Hezbollah's, and is actually to resist this expansion and this aggression.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Lindsey Graham will just say, well, that's what great Satan wants you to think.
Yeah, right.
No, it's really crazy. I mean, it's the same thing with China as well, how we keep on talking about how China is so aggressive and expansionist. And then you try to look at it in, the past several hundreds of years, what has China done that's really been imperialistic or aggressive?
Yeah.
It's just been invaded by the British, by the Japanese, by just other powers. But we always view it as
And then again, you just look at which is the country that has bases right up against the borders of Russia and China, and it's not that the Russians or the Chinese are establishing bases in Mexico and that they're regularly patrolling the coasts, and it's just obvious. They just look how the forces are deployed. Yeah, they're the ones that are pressured and surrounded, and not us. But somehow we're always on defense, and they're always the aggressors. That's just the language that we use.
Right. And I mean, and it's effective, and that's the problem for people that don't think too deeply on these topics. It works. That's why Israel repeats ad nauseum. Israel has the right to defend itself. Israel has the right to defend itself. BC, it does work on a large percent of the population, but it's starting. I think it's starting to crumble. It's hard to.
Starting. Yeah, obviously Gaza has done a lot of damage to that. I mean, in the past, what would happen is, we know when we've seen what's happened in the West Bank regularly. I mean, it's just the day-to-day aggression and expansion has been there for decades, and it just gets very little coverage. Occasionally, there's an incident that gets some media coverage in the U.S. and in the West more broadly. But in general, this constant expansion and oppression of into the West Bank and oppression of the Palestinians in general. It's a day-to-day thing that just is ongoing, and it gets very little attention. There's killings every week, and homes destroyed, bulldozed, and so on. We can go on and on and on, both in takes a different form, but in Gaza and the West Bank, it doesn't get covered. And then finally, if there's some kind of response, it could be a terrorist response. That it happened more often in the past, but it was a response after the Israelis had been doing this, for years and years. There's a suicide bomber, and then it's just like, oh, how can the Israelis, put up with this? They've obviously now got to bomb these people into oblivion. Because you never talked about the daily horror, right?
Right. I mean, well, King Abdullah touched on this in his UN speech, just talking about just the West Bank. Obviously what's been happening in Gaza is just beyond the pale in terms of death and destruction. But over 700 people have been murdered in the West Bank since October 7th. So we're talking about, about 2 a day. Including some Americans, right? An American was killed just a couple weeks ago, shot in the head. And then Biden said, oh, the bullet ricocheted and hit her. Doesn't even try to give condolences to it. But not only that, I think people need to realize that since October 7th, over 10,000 Palestinians have been taken hostage or detained, but it's a hostage situation. They take them. There's no trial. There's no
due process, right?
No due process whatsoever. And over 4,000 of them are women, and over 730 children that have been detained. So two a day. This isn't the West Bank. We've both been there. It's not a big place. That these villages some of them have just completely wiped out. That they've had to flee because these settlers have taken them over. And think about, they will go in and steal your children and take your children and detain them and with nothing and just use them as hostages. And
I mean, this is the horrible reality. And then we have the complete made up, story about Putin somehow taking children from Ukraine and what, of course, the whole thing was total nonsense, but that's what the ICC issued a warrant, for. That's why Putin's actually threatened with arrest. But this is real. This is ongoing, and it just is. It's just met with, it's ignored, right?
It's completely ignored, and it's infuriating when you go on social media and you just see this bring them home, talk about the hostages in Gaza. Which it's horrible for them too.
I would feel the same way if I was a member of that family or whatever. But okay, feel for them. That's fine. But then if you're a real human being, and you claim to have some sort of concern for humanity in general, think about the 10,000 Palestinians and all those families, all those mothers are wondering, when they're, and wives are going to say, when's my husband going to ever come home? Will he ever come home? Will he be the same? Well, what are they doing to him there? And, my child, what are they doing to him there? They know the kind of horrible, treatment that they're subjected to in those prisons.
Right. I mean, just as a relatively new father myself, just the idea of these people taking your children and holding them hostages. I mean, who knows what I would do? Who knows how far I would go? That's the thing.
I think the suicide bombing is never justified. In the end, it actually is counterproductive. But when you look at what these people have been through, when they've experienced exactly what we're talking about, and it's not just like it happened once, but it's like that's what they grew up with. At some point, something snaps inside and said, I'm just going to go and take out a bunch of those guys, with me. And you can actually understand that happening. You can't say, oh, these are just a bunch of crazies. If it happened here, in rural America, we would see the same thing, over time, people would just say, I've had it. I'm going to, my neighbor so-and-so, he's just going to go in and blow himself up because he's just too much. And you try to persuade him not to, but you understand why he would do it. Right.
Right. And I think more and more people are understanding around the world, because sometimes I will get emotional or just through empathetic channels of sympathizing with what the Palestinians have seen and experienced, especially if you see these videos of children that have been just shredded, just horrible things. It's hard to take any emotion out of it and not and I think this is what's destroying Israel in many ways. And
Well, again,
And I,
one thing I just want to mention real quickly, because we're talking about, um, we're forgetting about Gaza, but the horror is ongoing there. Just like because of there's so much going on. We forgot about the West Bank because of the Gaza horror, and now Lebanon is causing us to focus our attention there, and we're forgetting about the Gaza horror. But I think it was just yesterday, 32 children were killed in Gaza.
school bombing, right? They
Right, right.
bombed the
Nobody,
school.
it's hardly even noticed because now all the focus is on Lebanon. It's just that the Israelis are doing so much that people can't keep up with the carnage.
Right. And my fear is that once we have this chaos, when now all eyes are on Lebanon, this is when we will see ratcheting up in the West Bank and in Gaza. They may feel like this
Yeah,
is the
it's just
time to
people,
really.
right? The focus has shifted, and right, that could be very true. It may be even part of the plan.
I mean, I almost feel like it's already kind of happening.
Yeah.
I feel like the West Bank is starting to set fire, more so. I mean, we'll see. But yeah, it's just terrifying. It's so scary. I just don't. But both of these situations that we talk about, Ukraine and Israel in the Middle East, these are both igniting. And
Oh,
I
they've
feel like
ignited. They just said, yeah,
the,
they're burning hotter and hotter.
they're burning
So,
hotter, right? And I don't know if we want to pivot over to Ukraine right now, but I do feel like Zelensky, after he's still here, I believe, in the U.S.
uh-huh.
I just feel like he's going to get his way. And I've just been thinking about Biden and this is also just so crazy. There's so many crazy things happening in the world. I can't keep up, and my mind is getting torn all over the place. But just thinking that about Biden being in the mental state, cognitive state that he is, and he's in charge while the world is starting to explode.
He's the commander in chief of the world's most powerful
Right, and
country.
he's a fervent Zionist. That he said that there's no daylight between Israel and the United States.
Right.
He's also hates Russia with a passion. This Ukraine project's been something he's been involved in for decades.
Right.
So this is I just feel like that he would be willing to start World War III. Just the fact that he has been kicked out off the ballot here in the United States, and his legacy is at stake. That he's a bitter, angry old man, and this guy's in charge, and nobody even talks about it. We don't even talk about it. We just talk about Kamala, and we have to realize that
technically, right, he's still
Biden's still
president.
commander in chief. He's still president, and we're looking at potential. He wants to strike deep into Russia and destroy Russia, which by definition,
potentially.
if you look at Russia's nuclear doctrine, that would mean the end of the world.
Well,
I mean, it's hyperbole, but not much.
Right.
Not much, really. It really isn't.
I don't think there's any chance that there would be a nuclear response to something like that. But as Putin made clear, and as even Western leaders have admitted, like Scholz, such a strike would be actually carried out by NATO. It would be an attack on Russia, on pre-2014 Russia by NATO. And that is a huge escalation. It's just, again, I think we discussed it last time. It's amazing that just doesn't seem to make it into the discussion. That's just suppressed. There's this silly notion of fairness, and there's this, the idea that they're getting missiles from Iran or North Korea, and probably they aren't, but if they are, so what? What does it have to do with anything? You're not. Okay, well, anyway, I know we've talked about this before, but it just strikes me just how unserious we are in a very serious moment. And I guess like the very epitome of that is our own president, who's just, barely, I think, cognizant of where he is and, what day of the week it is.
Right. And the problem is, even after this election, the Middle East isn't going to get better for sure. Maybe we can have some real foreign policy change with regards to Russia, which would be nice if we can put out one tinderbox. But
maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah, there's reason to be slightly hopeful. I mean, it seems. I think actually Zelensky may have hurt himself by attacking Vance directly. I mean, that got some pushback from Trump. I think it made him really annoyed. Trump often operates on that very personal level, and now he's pissed off at Zelensky. And if Trump wins, that could be bad for Zelensky. I mean, it was also really a brazen intervention in a U.S. political fight. I mean, it should not have happened. And if we had if the U.S. had a sense of its own, let's say at least dignity, and if it was a serious country, which had that stood by its policies, he wouldn't do that. But he finds that, like, not to the extent that Netanyahu can, but he finds that Zelensky can shift American policy by, kicking up a fuss on TV.
Right.
And so he does it.
We have to say it's Russia interfering in our elections. It's not It's not Israel, or it's not Netanyahu.
Well, I mean, it's so
Zelensky.
obvious with Israel that it's just like, but it's Ukraine too.
Is it just me, or have we been, in terms of U.S. leaders or just world leaders in general, that they've just been steadily getting dumber and dumber and more incompetent? I mean,
I just feel like so. Yeah, I mean, it's just, I just say it's clear the quality, certainly in the U.S. I mean, you don't have to go back very far,
Yeah, I mean, I think about presidents in the 50s and, Eisenhower, or even going back
even
further.
Through the 60s, John F. Kennedy, and, Nixon was a very smart man.
I would say Nixon was smart.
Right. Johnson was no dummy. I mean, he was very corrupt, but he was no dummy. And neither was Carter. I mean, I remember there was a lot of talk when Reagan became president, he was an actor. And that, I have to say maybe that was a step down the road towards kind of dumbing things down. But
people love Reagan
compared, but when you compare Reagan to what we have now, he just seems such a statesman. And so, to be honest, but I think it was a sign of sort of the move towards actors and, maybe image over substance. And, especially since George W. Bush, and, we've really had nothing. Probably Obama was the most intelligent person that we had, and he was really a non-entity. I don't think you could not call him a statesman or anything. I think there's clearly been a very obvious downward trend. We have people that, you wonder how they rose to the top, but we have a system that produces these kind of leaders. I mean,
right.
And then it just seems to be true throughout much of the West. It's hard to explain, but that's what we have. I mean, it's not just that the U.S. and the Western powers are hanging on to this hegemony, but they're doing it while they themselves are regressing, and it's a strange thing to behold, but it's there right before us. I mean, mentally and spiritually regressing.
Right. I mean, basically, I became aware of politics. Is what the first presidential election I became aware of was the George W. Bush one. So just my experience of American presidents are like, these guys are pretty dumb. That these guys aren't that great, and it just kind of, you wonder, how does the system, how do we build a system that was supposedly one of the greatest systems ever invented, of democratic systems? How does it promote such incompetence now? Like, what made that happen? How did it?
Well,
is it just the deep state?
There are a lot of different things you can. I don't think there's a single explanation. One thing that just came to mind is, before we had people actually, like older American leaders, let's say Eisenhower and especially earlier, were more like, let's say, like Putin. They'd actually go out and lay out an argument, like they felt it was necessary to be logical and present the facts and whatever. I mean, you look at speeches that were made in the mid 20th century and earlier by American politicians, and they just seem so. You say, well, that would never fly today. This guy is like pretending to be smart or something. He's actually. But at some point, I think the marketing people took over. I mean, you learned that you could, you could move a certain percentage of the populace by, hitting using certain buzzwords, you heard certain slogans, and that began to become incorporated. They had actually have marketing people with focus groups to find out what seems to work, and this gets an emotional reaction, so let's use this slogan. And at first, that was kind of mixed in with some actual real discussion of policy, but it just seems like over time it ended up just crowding out, and now it's just pure style and or image and marketing. So that now that we get on Kamala Harris and Joy or whatever, and we don't even know what the policy is. It's all about image. And then Trump is Trump, but he's obviously no policy wonk.
Right. Well, that's a pretty sad state of affairs because, we were just talking about Biden and how incompetent he is, but just what we have waiting in the wing isn't that great. And, America as, a huge superpower, the global hegemon, maybe just barely at the state, but for still, obviously a very, very, very influential player that can wreak havoc across the whole globe. You just get incompetence that's being promoted at the top, and you're hoping that in this conflict that the American people would be able to have a choice to vote for peace, to have real discussion on very serious issues that obviously we're very concerned about. And I think many, many people are. And if they aren't, it's just because they haven't been presented.
Right, they haven't been informed. That's right. I mean, it's just the mainstream media have done a terrible job of actually talking about what's really at stake here. Mm-hmm. And so, most people are just live in a world of ignorance. And again, I think they become manipulated by, marketing strategies on both sides. Find out, well, let's push this button, push this emotional button, that emotional button. And, maybe we can shift the polls another percent in our favor. But it's not, but nowhere is there an actual serious discussion of policy.
Right. And we need it now more than ever. We need to have somebody strong to stand up and say that, we need to end this, we need peace. And you do have some voices like that are popping up in Europe, but here in the United States, I mean, other than people like Thomas Massey or, Ron Paul or Rand Paul, you don't have a lot here that gives me hope.
Yeah.
Okay, well, anyways, actually, I wanted to talk a little bit more about that pager attack.
Okay.
And just how damaging was it to Hezbollah? We talked a little bit about that, but more importantly, how damaging was it to Israel? How has the fallout been? Because initially, when it first happened, a lot of people, including myself, wasn't really quite sure how to take it. I'm like, was this a valid attack? Was this, very targeted, and is this a justified response? And is it going to really kind of subdue Hezbollah in any way? And I was kind of between both of them. I was like, obviously it's barbaric and horrific, but it was ingenious, and it was, as far as Israel concerned, it's quite targeted because Israel usually just carpet bombs.
Compared to a lot of the things they do, yeah.
Right. So
let's not forget that. I mean, it was just yesterday. They killed 600 people in their bombing raids, which in Lebanon.
Right.
So that's a huge number of people. And it was, don't tell me it was targeted. Of course, there are claims that somehow they're blowing up houses with cruise missiles hidden inside or whatever, but it's just,
right.
A lot of civilians died.
Dude, I mean,
I think they had a few dozen children were killed yesterday, just in Lebanon.
I heard some like 30-something children at least. It's horrific. And you wonder how many people were truly Hezbollah combatants, operatives.
Yeah. I'm not sure exactly. I remember the initial reports that most of those killed were Hezbollah commanders. There weren't too many killed by the pagers. There were actually more killed in the second wave of attacks. Apparently that was a larger bomb, fewer devices, but a larger bomb. So you had a higher kill to injured ratio. But the initial reports were that they were mainly Hezbollah commanders of some sort, not very high level. But then obviously there were 2 children too that were killed, and the thousands injured. I don't know exactly what the proportions were, but many of them were civilians. I know that Alistair Crooks says that actually these pagers were not used by Hezbollah, by the military wing, but it's really for the civilian wing.
That's what I was
And
going to bring
yeah,
up.
and I just don't know. That somewhat contradicts what I saw initially, but who knows? There's a lot of information that comes out, from different sources, and you just sometimes you really don't know. I guess they call it the fog of war. But what I would say that even if like most of the victims were military, it seems to me that it was not successful for Israel. They probably in the end it was counterproductive. And you think about it, this is something that the story is anyway, that was 15 years in the making. Clearly they spent millions of dollars doing this, and they finally pulled the trigger. What did they really achieve? I mean, at the most they killed a few, or we'll say, a couple dozen Hezbollah commanders, not high level. And they horrified much of the world. I think this, again, like we were saying earlier, even if it wasn't as barbaric as some of the things Israel did, it was just, it really horrified people. The images were just burned into people's minds. And, they see these devices, the kind of devices they carry around. And I think it makes the war very real to people who are not there. And they could think, my God, that could have been me. So I think in the end, it didn't really do any kind of strategic, long-term damage to Hezbollah, and it galvanized like Lebanese society, as we're saying, against Israel. So it seems to me that you would have to say that this was not this was a failure. This was something that went on. They obviously spent a lot of time planning, a lot of money and effort went into this. And then I don't think they really got anything. And you could argue that it was counterproductive in the end. And they can't do it again. It's the sort of thing, it's just like you can do it once and from now on, everybody's going to be paranoid about pagers and other communication devices. And I highly doubt that they would be able to pull this off again.
Has there been any condemnation, international condemnation from states for this type of attack?
Yeah, there certainly has been. I mean, even the UN Secretary General, he did not name Israel, but he said whoever's responsible needs to be held accountable, and he made it clear that this was a war crime. So yeah, there has been condemnation. I think not from the U.S. You just get these meaningless statements about, Israel needs to defend itself. But there were leaks. I know that actually, like from the CIA, that's said that they knew that there was something afoot, that Israel had this plan, and maybe not to do it on this particular date, but that the CIA decided at an early stage they did not want to be involved in this, and they would never do anything like that. That's what they said. So.
Right.
Which I hope is true, but
no other state would do something like this. Could do something like this,
right?
And the irony is that they say they're combating terrorists with terrorism.
Yeah, but it's terrorism, right? Of a certain sort. There's no question about it.
Yeah, and it's true just how you're saying how it affected. I think it affected the psyche of not just the people in Lebanon, but throughout the world, of just the terrifying prospect of how state-sponsored terrorism could affect each and every one of us if there was an actor that so wanted to do it. That the supply chain can be hijacked, and everybody has these devices in the room, and it could be anything.
Yeah.
Everything's got some type of battery now. There are reports of mothers hiding their baby monitors, taking them out of the rooms just because of that paranoia. It is a terrifying prospect. So will this have larger repercussions on just the global supply chain?
Well, it might. There was a story that came out, I think, almost immediately after the attacks, that there was a huge surge in orders to Chinese device makers. And there was always a condition, we're placing an order for so many thousands or whatever, on condition that all components are made in China. So they're just like, China is the one country that could actually produce, a device like this, I guess, aside from Taiwan, and, entirely in country. and people trust China, that China will not be infiltrated by Mossad or the CIA.
Right. And it makes you wonder if they did something like this, could they have done it elsewhere? In other supply chains,
right,
and other
who knows,
devices
there might
that are
be
around
something
the world.
out there that's waiting to explode, right?
It's
it's
scary.
not
And then
impossible.
right, and you hear about the Samson option. Is this, who knows? Who knows? Maybe there's nothing, and this is a one-time thing. I think that's probably very likely.
Probably. Yeah.
But if they were able to build up a shell company and get people to plant these little explosives, and they've shown that it's definitely possible. This wasn't even something that was on somebody's radar before this happened.
Yeah,
and
right.
Now all of a sudden it is. And
Right. I think
that will have repercussions.
Yeah, I think it could have repercussions for Taiwan in particular, because this was a Taiwanese company, and also a couple days afterwards, a story came out from Commonwealth magazine, which is is one of the most important or prestigious publications in Taiwan. And said they actually republished an article that they had done a dozen years earlier about this very same company and about how its links to the FBI. FBI had placed orders for pagers from this company and apparently other intelligence agencies. I didn't read the whole article. I was just able to read part of it. But that's going to, a lot of people are going to be hesitant to order these kind of things from a Taiwanese company. And, you've already seen the evidence that some of these supply chains are going to be shifting over to China. I don't know if that's going to have a major economic impact, but it is, it could be significant for a small country like Taiwan.
No, it's kind of funny. It's ironic that
I should say a region like Taiwan.
Yeah. Okay.
If we're going to use it.
I don't think anybody's going to get upset.
Okay, right.
Well, actually, you'll be surprised, as
No. I know some, and I understand. It's just, it's actually, it's something that you need to. It's actually not just the mainland Chinese, but even the the Kuomintang, which is currently still one of the major parties in Taiwan. They also take that position. Taiwan is not a country. Taiwan is a region. So, this is not some sort of, off the wall or unsupported position. It is proper to speak of it as a province or a region.
Right. Yeah, no, I've from living in China 10 years, building my first business there, and shipping to places like Hong Kong, I know how important it is to not have that in like a country drop down or whatever. I've had to be aware of that.
Yeah. No, that could get you in trouble.
Right. Okay, well, I'll switch gears a little bit. I've just been thinking about this a little bit. Is there something, do you think, that's hard-coded into our DNA to have an enemy? Because it seems like this is always our mindset. It's like you have to either demonize Russia, you have to demonize Iran, or if you don't do that, then you have to demonize China or demonize the Palestinians. I don't understand. Or is this just a product of being a global hegemon? Because I don't feel like when I was living in China that there was ever that feeling amongst the Chinese that there was like, these were the bad guys and these are the. But in the United States, it's always there's an enemy. You have to have an enemy. Why is that?
Yeah. Well, it's a little bit hard to explain. I think but it's been part of, you could say, the American DNA for quite a while. Of course, it happens in wartime. I guess for any country, if you become involved in a major war, there's a tendency to demonize the enemy. I guess the strange thing and the question that needs to be asked is why, after the end of World War II, it should have been like after World War I, there was actually a real effort to critically assess our involvement and also to admit some of our errors and exaggerations. There were a lot of atrocity stories that came out about the Germans, and afterwards, American scholars and journalists said, okay, a lot of that just wasn't true. Let's be honest. Okay, we really did get overheated. It never really happened after the end of that was after the end of World War I. But after the end of World War II, it seemed like it was just we went into a permanent state of if not actual war, but of ideological warfare. And I don't really have an answer for that. I guess you can always point to the interests of the military-industrial complex. It actually is in their interest to have an enemy. It's in the interest, of arms manufacturers and that whole complex around them to have an enemy. And so I'm sure that's part of it, but I don't think it can be purely that. It's not purely monetary. There's something ideological that it just became part of the American identity to be forever on a crusade. It's just the opposite of what America was intended to be originally. I guess it was Quincy Adams who said, that we shouldn't be in search of monsters to slay. And now we just feel like we have to have a monster and we go out and slay it. That's part of being an American now. And if you don't, you're not fully American.
And now we have multiple monsters that we have fabricated that don't need to be monsters.
Right, they don't need to be monsters. There was a real effort, like in the 1990s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, there were people like Pat Buchanan and others, on the left too, who said it's now time to become a normal country. Let's become a republic, stop being an empire. I know Pat Buchanan wrote a book with more or less that title around that time. And there was some hope that we could do that, but it failed. It's like the imperialists, right? The crusaders, the ideologues ended up winning, and they found new enemies. And at first it was Islamic terrorism, but now of course we added Russia and China to the mix, and we really have
right. With countries like Russia and China, they never wanted to be our enemy, and I mean China has been trying to do trade with us long. Right. I mean, isn't it true that Putin wanted to join NATO and was rebuffed? I mean, can you tell us a little bit about that? I mean,
I don't know the details of it, but it was in fact true. I mean that it was like in the soon after he took power, there was an effort, and he was told no, and then in the years that followed, I think it was clear that Putin was bending over backwards, and in general. Okay, the Russian government and Russian society was oriented to the West and saw that their future, was with the West. The last thing they wanted was actually to break relations, which is where they find themselves now. But they were continually, the olive branches were always smacked down, and it's a history that we've gone over before. And now Putin himself says, okay, he was naive. He should have seen the signals that there was this very real hostility towards Russia, and that he shouldn't have ignored it. He was trying to look past it and just look for common interests, but it failed. The Minsk Accords is one of the best examples of that. But I think the Chinese have had a similar experience, and it's actually they're sort of a little bit behind the Russians, but now they're catching up. After they just find there's this unrelenting hostility, and they finally realize that there's just really not a whole lot that we can do. It's just that there is this government, for whatever reason, is out to get us. It wants to damage us, wants to limit us, wants to weaken us.
Mm-hmm. And it's such a shame because it just didn't have to be this way. I remember one of my econ professors was Russian, and she told us this story about when McDonald's first came into Russia, and how she went there with her family. They lived somewhere a long ways away. They went and visited Moscow, and they went to the McDonald's, huge line. And she was so excited about it. Everybody was just so excited to have American stuff here. Yeah. And she got the receipt, and she had it framed, the McDonald's receipt, and it was in her room. Yeah. And this is a sentiment that was most of Russia was like this. They just loved America. They wanted to be part of America, part of the America's sphere.
Right. And it was also true of their government. It was Actually, I
Right.
think like those the pro-Western elements actually persisted in the government longer than they did within the general population.
And it was the same thing when I was in China. When I was in China from the first time was 2010, but then from 2012 all the way to 2022. Whenever I would get in a taxi and talk to people, or just they'd ask you, where are you from? You said and I'd be like, oh, I'm from America, and they would love it. They would be like, yes, America, number one, number one. Although starting towards the end, I wasn't getting it as much. I could see things starting to change, but
Yeah.
there was always this. There was never any animosity from the Chinese
Right.
towards America. They loved America, and they loved the movies and the music, and they always talk about hamburgers.
I think
So
the
it
Chinese
just-
food actually is much better. They
Of
really
course,
don't eat
of course.
hamburgers, but
Well, they
anyway.
just think it's they don't, but they just think it's interesting. That's always the thing. They're like, oh, 你们吃汉堡包, they always
Yeah,
say that. But this is, it just makes me think of the world that could have been.
Yeah.
That these countries like Russia and China, they loved the United States. They wanted to be part of it. They wanted to work with it, integrate it, learn from it, and grow alongside it.
Right.
But
Well,
we took
that's
this
the world we
stance.
could have had if, let's say, Pat Buchanan, on the right, or Ralph Nader on the left, had become president. They were both, third-party candidates, but they were shot down. The establishment.
Right.
Yeah.
It
But
would have been
those-
great to
yeah.
be proud to be an American. You go
Right.
to these other countries and people are like, oh, yeah, you guys are awesome. You're not invading everybody and trying to make an enemy out of my country and
Yeah.
demonizing and spreading lies and fomenting revolutions. We could have just been that, the real beacon of light, of freedom and censorship and prosperity and peace. But we took the wrong course, and we're in this situation where we've dug ourselves a deep hole, and we have no choice, or we do have a choice, but our State Department feels like there's no choice but to double down. The neocons are too embedded into our foreign policy, so it's sad. But yeah, I was just having that thought last night, like what the world that could have been if we just had some more reasonable people. Can you point at a time where we made that mistake and consciously decided that this was wrong? Was it Bill Clinton when he decided to expand NATO? Like if there was
Yeah,
somebody else that won out, or
Well, sounds like it was actually in relation to Russia. It was the hostility to Russia, the decision to make Russia the enemy, actually was made at a very early stage. It wasn't general open policy, but Jeffrey Sachs was intimately involved in negotiations between the new Russian government and the West, and particularly the U.S., and in helping to devise their economic policy. Says that because he had earlier worked for Poland, and now he was over Russia. He was going to try to introduce some similar macroeconomic policies. And right away, he found out that there was a completely different attitude. Whereas in Poland, he goes, "Oh yes, we can do that for you. $1 billion will be in your, in the Polish bank account tomorrow, or whatever. To support this new, the issuance of the new currency or whatever it might be." In Russia, is, "Oh no, I'm sorry, we can't do that. We can't do that. We can't do that." There were people, at the highest level of government that always never stopped seeing Russia the enemy. It makes you realize that it wasn't so much for them about Soviet ideology. It was for some reason Russia. Now I can't explain that there, but that was there. So that was the 90s and the fateful. In the 90s, at least you had a debate like within the U.S. A lot of people came out, including real statesmen, people, George Kennan, who was considered like the architect of our Cold War policy. Came out and warned strongly against NATO expansion and predicted the consequences. Quite presciently. Things came out just the way he said they would. In fact, he said that, we're going to ignore Russia. Finally, they're going to respond. And when they do, we'll shriek and say, look, now, we proved that they're evil. That's exactly what he said. And that's exactly what happened. So,
Is he still
quite
around?
a real prophet when it came to that.
Yeah,
So that was, no,
Jordan.
he's not, he's passed away quite a while ago. But yeah, during the 90s, you had a lot of people, again, even heads of the Defense Department and in the American debate. There was an open debate, and a lot of people were saying, hey, this is a really bad idea. And Clinton was, I mean, like the guy, he's not an ideologue. He's a politician. And then he just, I think mainly for domestic political reasons, like he decided to go ahead with this. And so that was a fateful decision right there, kind of the mid 1990s. If I would point to one time, there was a brief kind of opening, a window, especially in the early 90s, a few years after, the Soviet Union dissolved, where it looked like, maybe we really could have the American empire, NATO could gracefully, say mission accomplished and dissolve itself, but those things didn't happen. There was a decision to keep NATO, not just to keep it, but to expand it. And I think that was probably the beginning of the end right there.
Oh, what a shame. What a shame. Because now there is no political force.
Yeah, no, it's
That
completely silent. I mean, like, that's right. I mean, so now you have people like Jeffrey Sachs who have been just pushed out of the mainstream entirely.
Right.
I mean, these were, again, people were right at the center of power. You would have even up until right before the start of the SMO, he could call the White House directly and say, hey, you need to negotiate. They made an offer. You can, we can negotiate. We can avoid a war. And he was just told, no, we can't do that. When the war happened, and now, he's just completely cut out. He was still actually, interestingly, he would still appear in mainstream media until I think it was a Bloomberg interview. And they asked him started talking about the Nord Stream pipeline. And he said, yeah, he believed the U.S. blew it up. And their jaws just dropped to the floor. And that was it. No more Jeffrey Sachs. But
Yeah, no, it's crazy. It's true. I mean, Jeffrey Sachs wrote like half of my undergrad econ textbooks.
Right.
Like I knew his work well, and he was right there, like you said, everywhere. Now he's been relegated to small independent YouTube channels.
Right.
Because they're the only ones that will have him on. It's like
yeah,
this guy,
and who knows, they may get he may get shut down at some point. We'll see. I mean, some of the channels, we'll see. We know what happens.
I hope ours never does. I think luckily right now we're small enough, we're flying under the radar, but we do need to be careful, I believe, because and that's just scary that we live in that type of world where the U.S. is supposed to be free speech. I don't feel like we're doing anything wrong, but clearly there are forces out there that believe that we are.
Right.
Right. And that is
again,
a situation.
You never think. Like here, I'm not. I want the best to happen for the U.S. The best to happen for the U.S. is for the U.S. to become a republic again. Yeah, to actually go back to its roots and focus on its own problems. I think this is actually, if you talk to the average American and you start putting in those terms, they'd understand. I mean, it's a patriotic thing to do.
Right. It's these forever wars are destroying the United States. It's not patriotic to support this.
Right.
It's destroying our reputation on the world stage, and it will have disastrous consequences. Economic consequences with the de-dollarization. We too will become an international pariah. We will refuse to try to join the multipolar world, which sounds like a fantastic thing to be part of. And just the real danger is that as the U.S. empire collapses, will we try to take the rest of the world with us? And we're kind of going that direction right now. So let's hope it doesn't happen and cooler heads prevail. But just looking at our political system and the size of our State Department, it just doesn't look good. It feels like it's going to come to a total collapse where basically maybe the people will just be like, hey, well, we didn't vote for any of this. This is getting too out of control. And then there's going to be chaos and unrest. Any way that this plays out, I just don't see it playing out well for us. We don't have any. We've talked about how in Israel there is no political force to oppose Netanyahu. I feel like in the United States, really, there's no political force to oppose Zionism, support for Israel.
Unfortunately,
there's a small political force to end the war and normalize relations. Maybe not even normalize relations with Russia, but at least end the war in Ukraine.
Right, and reduce the hostility. There is some, So there's a reason to be somewhat hopeful on that front.
Right. Well, I wanted to maybe do a little touch up and recap on just what's happening with Hezbollah and Israel, but we're already coming up to an hour.
I think,
Do you want to say anything real quick if there's anything that we should be...
No, I think we've said enough today.
Okay, we can save it for Friday.
Okay.
Dive even a little bit deeper, because I do know that, there are increased rocket attacks heading into places like Tel Aviv, and but we will let it develop, and we can speak a bit more clearly on it.
Right.
Friday. Okay, then we'll end it there. All right, thanks a lot, Dad.
Okay.
All right, have a good day.
You too.